Okay, so today we'll continue talking about Candide. This is the second tutorial on Voltaire's Candide. Last time, basically, we established the fact that basically Voltaire is writing a satirical work that could be also classified as a philosophical tale because it tries to impart a message, right, to the readers, and it teaches a lesson. And so we know that basically, as a philosophical tale, Voltaire actually launches an attack on an 18th century way of thought, or actually philosophy that could be based on religion, which is called basically optimism, right? And through the character of Pangloss, actually Candide satirizes the whole philosophy of optimism altogether, and uses basically the element of satire to ridicule and to show the absurdities and the shortcomings of optimism, right? And so, just a reminder, what are some of the tenets of optimism? What are some of the teachings of optimism that are represented in the novel, basically, by the character of Pangloss? That everything is for the best. Yeah. Right? Yes. Everything is right for God, basically. Everything is and everything is right. Yeah, right? So basically, it comes from a religious belief that we live in the best of all possible worlds, and everything happens for the best, right? So even if individuals suffer, or on a personal individual scale, or humanity suffers on a wider scale, actually this suffering is all part of basically a grand, a universal plan by God, where there necessarily should be something good out of it eventually at the end of the day, right? And also that everything in the world happens for a reason. So there is the cause and the effect, and so even if there is suffering as an effect, there necessarily should be a cause, and the cause would be basically maybe the corruption of mankind, or corruption or the sins of one individual, or the sins of people in general. And also there could be a trace of that corruption and sinfulness in human beings to basically the original sin, right? That Adam committed, Adam and Eve, right? When they were kicked out of heaven and paradise into a life of suffering, maybe on earth. Anyhow, so we talked about Pangloss's character, and we talked about how basically Pangloss appears in the book itself as basically a tutor and a mentor and a philosopher. He's kind of like an intellectual person who has knowledge almost in different fields, the metaphysics, the theology, cosmology, he has all that intellect, and he has all that knowledge in different fields. But the major element we have to know about him is that he is the embodiment of the philosophy of optimism. He starts out as a person who believes in optimism from the beginning, and he teaches optimism basically too. He's a mentor and a teacher, right? And a tutor. So he teaches that philosophy of optimism to Candide and other characters actually who live in the Westphalia castle, the Barracks castle, the Thunder 10 Franc castle, right, in Westphalia. And so Pangloss from the start believes in the work, everything being for the best, and there's cause and effect in everything, and there's a reason behind, there's rational, justification for things. And from the start we realize that basically Voltaire is trying to ridicule or Voltaire is ridiculing this ideas and thoughts because the rationalization that Pangloss presents behind the fact that there is a cause and effect for everything in life happens according to the relationship of cause and effect, and that everything is for the best, actually is rationalized in sometimes an absurd manner, and the reader realizes the absurdity and the shortcomings of that philosophy. Pangloss starts from the beginning as an optimist and ends up towards the end of the narrative as an optimist, right? He upholds the concept of optimism, and behind every suffering, he actually sees that there's a good outcome or a better outcome. So from the start, he believes that basically every time him or a different character goes through an ordeal or a disaster or an element of or pain or suffering, he actually says that at the end, this pain and these disasters bring out the best. And like towards the end, we get Pangloss sitting in the farmhouse that basically Candide purchases, and at the end he says that if we have not gone through all these disasters and all these destructions and all these pains and all these sufferings, we wouldn't be sitting here, in the farmhouse eating pistachios. And so everything necessarily is for the best, right? That's what he says towards the end. And so he starts and ends up basically upholding the concept and the philosophy of optimism. Okay, so that's how we looked at the character Pangloss, but now we're going to look at the different characters in the book and how do they look at basically at the concept of optimism. We're going to look at Candide because we know that Candide does go through this journey. He does go through this physical journey that it's actually you can trace on the map in your book, that page right before actually the title page of page 1. Candide also goes on this journey and trip. It's a physical journey and trip where he starts in Thunder Centron's castle, right? And in Westphalia, which we learn is the best of all possible worlds, and everybody who lives there is the best. So the Baron is the best Baron in the universe. The Baron is the most gracious. The girl, Candigande, who lives there is the most beautiful Baron's daughter in the world. So basically everything is for the best in that world. And Pangloss, the best philosopher, actually tells him that everything's for the best and this world is the best of all possible worlds. And then we know that basically a kiss ends up the reason for Candide being kicked out of the palace, right, or the castle, and from there on, actually, his journey begins. So he goes, he travels in different areas in the old world, or as they call it, Europe of that time. And it's called the old world because by then the new world was discovered, which is the Americas, right? So Candide goes on a trip from the Baron's, from Westphalia, from Thunder Centron's basically castle back in Germany and to the Bulgarian camp, and then he goes to Holland, and then he goes to Lisbon, Holland and Lisbon, and then after Lisbon he goes actually to a place called Cadiz, right? If you trace it on the map, and then Cadiz is a city in Spain, and from Spain he embarks on a journey to the New World. And basically, he travels, through the Atlantic, and some of the episodes take place during that trip in the Atlantic, and they end up in Buenos Aires, or he ends up in Buenos Aires. We're going to talk about every time and every stop he has, who he encounters, or who he meets another time during the trip, and we'll talk about the importance of every encounter and every appearance of characters. Anyhow, so he ends up in Buenos Aires, and then after Buenos Aires, he travels to, he goes on his way to Paraguay, then the land of the Orleans, that's where the cannibals live, right, I think. Anyhow, and then El Dorado, and then from El Dorado to Suriname, and then from Suriname he decides to travel back to the New World, right? And to end up in Venice. But before going to Venice, he visits. There's a short trip to Paris, and then he goes across. He ends up on the port of Portsmouth in London, right? And they don't go into England, and then finally reaches Venice. And then after Venice, actually, he ends up and settles in Turkey, right? He goes to Constantinople, Turkey. Yeah. And that's where actually he settles and buys his farm. Anyways, this is the physical journey he goes through. And just keep in mind, basically, that in every place and every stop, there's a new set of characters he might meet, or he might re-encounter actually some of the characters that appear in earlier stages of his life. Okay? So now since we're talking about the physical trip, and so this physical trip also reflects actually also It's not just a physical journey and trip he takes. It also reflects a metaphorical, or basically another trip he also goes to, which is his intellectual, philosophical trip, where basically he starts also in Westphalia with believing in the philosophy he was taught by, in the philosophy of life he was taught by Pangloss, which is the philosophy of optimism. And then throughout his trips, he continues. He starts kind of like, basically, his trips might be a confirmation of what he already believes in, and optimism makes him believe more in it. And or during some of his, further, and when he travels more away from home, kind of, he also starts putting the philosophy of optimism to question after almost every disaster that he goes through or other characters go through. And he starts kind of questioning optimism and doubting in its viability to understanding how life operates, and also that he starts doubting that the world, after like a life separation, will end up being the best of all possible worlds. And then there are some, there's a moment or two where you can call them as turning points in which basically Candide might, after questioning the philosophy of optimism and whether it's a realistic representation of how life is, he might even renounce it at a specific point altogether, or put it to question where he highly doubts it, and towards the end you feel like he kind of renounces it altogether, and in favor of another philosophy. Okay? We're going to look at this also intellectual, philosophical growth and journey and transformation while we're looking at his physical journey. And also, we're going to look at the characters who reappear in his life. Okay? So Voltaire's work altogether is a work of satire, right? Satire, the work satirizes the philosophy of optimism. Also, that's in terms of content, in terms of meaning, right? And also, Voltaire's work could be considered also an attack and a criticism of a way of writing during the 18th century. Yeah. So it could be also he uses a specific style in his writing, and that style he uses actually is also a criticism and a satire of a general way of thought writing during the 18th century, and that is called the writing that's called the quality of Kant. And so, do you know what Kant is in terms of writing? And what is Voltaire's basically style in writing? Yes, he's sarcastic in his writing. However, sarcastic means he's launching attacks on basically just ills of society or attacks against institutions in society and people. And he's using a very direct, straightforward manner in launching his attacks, in expressing his satire too, right? His criticism, his satire. His language is very frank, very straightforward, and he is not using any linguistic avoidance of expressing his criticism. And so, basically, his writing holds the quality of candor. That is the opposite, actually, of the quality of Kant. Kant is a quality and a style of writing where 18th century writers used it in order to basically sugarcoat their criticism of some elements they want to, criticize. It's like using linguistic avoidance to directly criticize something. So in this case, the style would be the writer would basically sugarcoat his words, or basically use in indirect ways of talking about society, or not avoiding even talking about the ills of society altogether. So Voltaire actually used the quality, or had the quality of candor in his writing in order to frankly, directly, and in a very straightforward manner criticize the ills of society, or describe life as it is. So he would describe suffering as it is and describe the ills of society as they are, in a very direct, frank manner. Okay? And so in his book, basically some characters use in their language and the way they describe their experiences, use the quality of candor more than others. Okay? And basically the women writers in Candide are ones who actually use candor and a frank way of describing actually their experiences and their internal and inner thoughts and ideas and emotions, and so they're very straightforward, very frank about describing their experiences and describing their inner emotions and thoughts, almost as opposed to male characters who kind of use it's still, the whole book is actually uses the quality of candor, so it's supposed to, everybody's supposed to uphold that quality of being frank and direct, except that women characters uphold it and it appears in their language more than the male characters. Okay? In this case, we're going to look at one of the major female characters, look at her perspective, and look at basically in the book how she describes her own experiences and in what language and what style does she use in order to express actually her experiences and what she goes through. Okay? So when does Candigande appear? Let's start actually with the fact that Candigande, her name actually reflects the level of candor that basically, and the frankness basically was expresses in his work. So Candigande, her name, let's start with that. What does her name reflect and what does it mean? Okay, so Candigande basically is a name that has a historical, basically that's based on historical character, and that person is the wife of Henry II. Her name is Candigande. And Candigande, the wife of Henry II, actually is considered an icon of chastity. She is basically reflects chasteness. Okay, because her and her husband basically take a vow of chastity all their life. Okay, so that's one. So Candigande Woodhead, her name was chosen based on the historical character or historical figure of Saint Candigande, Henry II's wife, and and it's derived from that name. So it reflects a level of chastity, and also her name basically has an explicit also sexual reference. Okay, so it refers, or it kind of has a quality, or it has a sexual tone to it, sexual reference to it. Okay, so it kind of, then her name combines both chastity and also sexuality, and it has both of them play into the name, and we're going to see how that reflects in the character of Candigande. However, part of the candor that comes basically through these associations that are attached to the name, we're going to notice that it plays into her character. So, and her name is promotes the quality of candor that she has. Okay? And so what I want you to do is that, remember, or because you read this at home, Chapter H, or look through Chapter H right now, quickly, and try to trace the quality of candor and frankness in the way Candigande tells her story and expresses her emotional and state of mind, and expresses herself altogether. Okay? Because you know that basically the whole book is narrated by Dr. Ralph, except for several episodes that are narrated by women characters, right? And so the first would be on Chapter 8, where Candigande basically narrates the story. But okay, before you look at the episodes altogether, how does Candide get into contact with Candigande? How does he reconnect? We know that basically he kisses Candigande just outside of the castle. Yeah. Yeah. Heal his wound.
And after that, taken to a place in a room.
Yeah, like an isolated farmhouse.
Yes, but and after she's she kind of happy with it, and he realized that she's alive,
and that's when she tells her story, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So basically, we know that basically prior to reconnecting with Gandhi, Candide himself goes from basically Westphalia. He gets recruited by the Bulgarian soldiers basically, and recruited to their army, right? And then what happens afterwards? Actually, on a day where he went to take a walk. The Bulgarian soldiers think that he was attempting to escape, so they recruit him back and they punish him by flogging, right? He gets flogged and then they leave him and gets to suffer, and that's when actually the Anabaptist, right? James finds him and he actually saves him. He heals his sores, his wounds and his sores, and he provides him with food and shelter. And then while he's actually touring in town one day, he stumbles upon a beggar who he identifies later as Pangloss. And Pangloss at that moment is ill and sick and diseased. He has a sexual transmitted disease that he's contaminated with, right? And so the Anabaptists actually, Candide asks the Anabaptist to also help Pangloss, and he does spend a fortune on Pangloss curing him, right? And then we learned that basically the Anabaptist wants to go on a trip to Lisbon, like a business trip. And he takes along with him Candide and Pangloss, right? And during the ship, while the ship is sailing and during the trip on board, actually what happened? A storm hit, and so the ship gets wrecked, right? And destroyed by the storm, and everybody on board perishes except for Pangloss and Candide and the sailor too. The Anabaptist, we learned, is drowned in sea, and he gets drowned because of his, good nature. He saves the sailor. He saves the sailor and ends up drowning. And the sailor, who also, in return, could have saved him too after being saved, just does not save him, and so we learned that the Anabaptist dies at sea. He drowns, and Candide actually tries to save him. However, Pangloss stops him and tells him that he tries to basically, Candide at that moment questions if this is the best of all possible worlds, where a good man like the Anabaptist just ends up, dying for saving a person or drowning. Pangloss says, well, basically the port of Lisbon was built for the Anabaptist to drown in. And so you see what kind of absurd kind of connection he makes in order to present the case of cause and effect, right? And so this is the best of all possible worlds. And so they continue their trip to Lisbon, and when they're in Lisbon, the earthquake hits. And so they end up also eventually surviving, right? And while they're in kind of like a shelter for the survivors, Pangloss tries to Pangloss basically tries to soothe the people who are lamenting basically this natural disaster, and they're crying, they're watering their bread. And so Pangloss, what does he say? He tells people basically that the earthquake couldn't have been in anywhere else other than Lisbon, basically because there's a volcano under Lisbon, so it's normal that an earthquake hits Lisbon, right? And then actually he told the survivors that this is, and then therefore this is like the best of all possible worlds. And so basically inquisitors hear him, and these inquisitors are on a mission in Lisbon to collect all the people who are heretics, people who kind of are the reason actually for God punishing the people of Lisbon with a natural disaster, because they think that he's a heretic. They question how this could be a best of all possible world. So they decide on punishing Pangloss and Candide, right? Right? And so the punishment they decide on Pangloss is to be executed, hanged, right? And then burned on the stake. And Candide, who was listening to him, is just to be flogged 100 times, right? And what happens? Pangloss is hanged, yeah, but not burned. His body doesn't get burned because there's rain, right? And so the fire, it's not possible that a fire could be lounged, right? And so we think that Pangloss dies at that moment because he was executed. And what happens to Candide is that he's saved by an older woman who basically takes him after she heals his wounds and feeds him to an isolated farmhouse, and that's where he Candide, right? And now Candide tells her story. Tells about the misfortunes and suffering she goes through. And so in chapter 8 we get Candida's perspective. So look for, as I said, the quality of candor when she describes her experiences, her frankness, her straightforwardness in describing what she goes through, and also look at her point of view and how she looks at life. And what does she think about life and about Pangloss's thoughts altogether? So in chapter 8 would be basically on from page 19 to 21. Can you skim through it very fast and try to highlight the elements of candor in her language, her frankness? And look at how Candida's language contrasts almost with Dr. Rauser's narration, or even Candida's language. Anybody? Since you've read this? Okay, I can point out something to you guys, and you tell me how basically that element in Candida's language reflects the quality of candor. If you all look at page 19, the second paragraph, we learn basically from Candide that what happens to her. We learn that the Bulgarian soldiers attacked her father's castle, and she, yes, as you said, she gets raped by a Bulgarian soldier. And her mother and father, the Baron and Baroness, get murdered and killed, right? And not only that, actually she mentions that she gets a blow on her thigh, right? She gets stabbed in her thigh. And there's a scar over there, and Candide innocently thinks that he wants to see the scar, while she's actually relating the horrific scene to him, right? And so he's very naive when he says he wants to see the scar. However, she's very serious, very straightforward in describing the horrors that she went through. So basically, she starts with saying that she was raped by a soldier. Yes. And she says that she was being raped by a soldier. And while she was being raped, what happened? The general the general who's supposed to be superior to the soldier enters the room. And he notices, and basically when he enters the room, the soldier who is raping her does not salute his general. Right? And so what happens? So the general gets angry and kills him on the spot. So he kills him. And so Candide basically says that she was saved by this man. Because basically, one, the soldier did not greet him. Two, he noticed her beauty. And so he saves her, and he helps to heal her wounds, and he takes her to his house, his place. Right? And so she ends up washing and cleaning for him, right? Let's look at that sentence, because I want you to look at candor and the quality of candor in her life, and what she says. Paragraph 2, line 6. Paragraph 2, line 6, page 19. I used to wash the few shirts he owned and cook for him. He found me very attractive, I must say. And I will not deny that he was well-built himself, or that his skin was white and soft. Otherwise, not much wit, and even less philosophy. You could soon tell that he had not been educated by Dr. Pangloss. Let me continue just a little bit. After 3 months, having lost all his money and his taste for me, he sold me to the Jew named Don Azikar, who had trading connections in Holland and Portugal, and was passionately fond of women. Okay, so from this paragraph that I read, or from these lines that I read, and these are said in, by Gandhi, how does it reflect the quality of candor? Yeah. Yeah, she did say that the general is not as witty as those people who have been educated by Pangloss. He doesn't look like he's philosophical at all. However, now who is this general? He is the head of the army who ravaged basically her dad's castle, who murdered her mom and dad. They murdered the Bulgarian army, murdered her father and mother, and she was multiply raped by a Bulgarian soldier. And this man who saved her, he saved her because he was attracted to her, and he ends up basically abusing her, sexually abusing her. Okay, and notice basically that she is very frank in describing this. She does not shy away from describing her experience. And she describes this as horrible as it is. She's very straightforward. She's frank. And then, notice what she says and how she describes this general of the army. Despite the fact that he inflicted so much pain because of murdering her family and also using her sexually, she was attracted to him. She was attracted to his skin and white, that was white and soft, and he was well built. And so she's not shying away from describing this. And she describes her inner ideas and thoughts. And so you think about how frank she is in talking about the person who inflicted so much pain upon her, who has murdered her family, and then she describes that she was somehow attracted to him because he was well built and he had white and soft skin. That's very frank. That's very straightforward, right? Okay, and so that's an element in her candor. And see how her name also can reflect in her character. The name choice, Kandigande, whatever the name suggests, it's reflecting her character. And also, yeah. Well, sorry, what's your question? Henry VII's wife. She took a vow of chastity. She is the quintessential icon of chasteness. And so, chastity. But now you'll look at the element of chastity in the lines that follow in her story. This one reflects the element where she was a sexual object in the hands of this person who abused her family, and yet because of her frankness, she does express, and she does not shy away from saying that she had a liking towards this man, and she was attracted to him. And remember, she's telling the story to Candide, who's supposed to be the man she loves, right? And the man, she wants to end up with, right? So it's really, she's really very straightforward, very frank in expressing herself, right? And where else can you find that quality of candor in her language and describing her experience? The same line, when she says basically that after a while, right, she says that after 3 months, having lost all his money and his taste for me, he sold me to a Jew named Don Azikar. Now, he lost all his money, he lost his taste in her. So she's also frank in saying that basically he lost his taste for her. And actually your book notes that we're reading, the English translation. But in the French original, basically, the expression is not actually losing taste in her, but rather it says after she was disgusted of me, or disgusted from me. So she's also frank in saying that actually the general becomes disgusted of her. Yeah? Look how frank she could be. And she sells her to a Jew, and that's significant too. Issachar. So basically, why is it significant that when after he's disgusted of her, he sells her to a Jew? Jews were considered basically on the lower ranking of basically society, and also the lower ranking of the Catholic, Roman Catholic Church had a ranking basically for people where there's God and then there's basically the priests who come on the top, and then there's a classification of people, and towards the end you have actually women and Jews. And so basically for the general to sell her to a Jew is like disposing of her. She's like, brother, she's trash for him at the moment. He's selling her to like a Jew. Somebody on the very lower end of society. And she says that frankly to Candide. She's honest about it. She's straightforward. She's frank. And where else do you see the elements of candor in her description of her experiences? After being sold to the Jew, right? Issachar. Actually, the Grand Inquisitor of the area also notices her when she goes with basically Issachar to the town, right? And what happens is that he takes a favor in her. He notices her beauty. Like every man who meets Kandigande in this narrative gets attracted to her beauty. Okay, so that's part of actually her being like treated as a sexual object almost. And so he gets a liking of her, and so he decides that he wants to share her with the Jew, right? And so he does, and they divide the week among them, where the Grand Inquisitor gets 4 days. He's the Grand Inquisitor. He gets 4 days, and the Jew, who even if he was he owned her before, he gets 3 days, right? And so look at that, where basically the Jew would have Mondays, and the Sabbath, and the Inquisitor would have the other days of the week. And they arranged so, the arrangements last seven months that way. And we learned that basically the Jew and the Grand Inquisitor would quarrel on one day. And that is the Saturday, Sunday night, right? But she learned something, and that's also a reflection of her candor. She learns that on the end of that paragraph where she says, "For my part, I have so far resisted them both, which I am sure is the reason they both love me still." And that's an element of chastity. She actually realized that even if they share her, she is not engaging with them physically. And she's withholding that because she realizes, and see, this is part of her wisdom, the wisdom that she gains also in the world, that she realizes that if she withholds actually sexually, they will not dispose of her just like the general disposed of her. And she realizes that her power lies in her sexual appeal. And so that's part also of her candor and part of her being really realistic and reaching that level of wisdom. Okay? And what else reflects her candor? So that's how straightforward, how frank, how direct she is in describing herself. And also, if you look at the end of her episode, her narration, and look at page 21. At the end, after she talks about basically her experiences, and she talks about how she ended up with the Grand Inquisitor and Issachar, dividing, ended up with them. She says that she realized that she's living a very horrible life. She's living a horrible life, and she says that she reached this realization, and that's on page 21, the first paragraph, the last line of page. In the first paragraph, she says, "Pangloss deceived me cruelly. After all, when he told me that all is for the best in this world. Okay? So, what do you say about that, and compare this point of view to actually the Candide and the point of view that's expressed by Pangloss as we go further in the journey? What does this reflect about basically Candidande's character, other than her being very straightforward, very frank about her experiences? She's being very realistic, as opposed to a lot of characters who are not. And she learned early on. She gained the wisdom also. This is like a second piece of wisdom she gained from her experiences, that Pangloss's theory was not true. She was deceived by him, actually. It's on page 21, did I tell you? Yeah, page 21. That first paragraph, last sentence. Pangloss deceived me cruelly, after all, when he told me that all is for the best in this world. Distraught and despair, she says beside me, with anger at every moment I live or whatever. So the idea is that she realized early on that, no, this world could not be characterized as the way Pangloss does. No, optimism does not exist. Basically, Pangloss deceived her, and so she is more realistic in terms of realizing that optimism is not the governing philosophy of the world, and that she suffers and she realizes her suffering, and she lives through them, yes, and she learns lessons too. She gains some elements of wisdom, right, from her experiences, and so this reflects her level of her being realistic, her level of realism, as opposed to actually a lot of the male characters who are not as wise as she is. And we're going to notice basically there's a parallel between her realism and how realistic she is in looking at her experiences and the old woman's experiences. Because, and later on we're going to learn about a third character, Pegatika, right? Who also goes through kind of like similar experiences, get abused by a lot of male characters in their lives. And a lot of lives through a lot of misfortunes, and then realize that basically part of living life is to suffer, and suffering is just part of life. And they realize it, and they gain maybe wisdom out of that realization, or they just accept them and move on without trying to attach their experiences to basically optimism, right? Yeah. Now what else? Okay, so now since I'm talking about the old woman, actually, just to reach the narrative of the old woman, what happens after Candigande tells her story? Don Ivukar is coming it's his right to come that night. And so he appears, and because of his sudden appearance, Candy murders. And then the Grand Inquisitor appears right after that. That's the night, the Saturday, Sunday night, where they actually have an understanding between them usually. The Grand Inquisitor also appears, and Candide also murders them. And then they all flee together. The old woman, Candide, and Candigande. And so when they flee to Cadiz, is this? Right? Cadiz, and that's in Spain. And in Cadiz, they learn that there's a ship that's taking off to the New World. Now they want to try their fortune in another world. The old world brought upon all misfortune, so now they went out to travel. They learn that there's a group of Christians, right, who went to go to Paraguay to support basically a revolution or an attack that will take place against Spain. And so now they sailed the Atlantic, and that now we are taking the old woman's narrative. I want you to look at the Tanjur and the realistic portrayal and point of view the old woman had. But in the old woman's experience, I want you to look at just one paragraph, because now since we've talked about basically the satire that was advanced against basic optimism, and we talked about also the stylistic criticism he does against Kant and how Voltaire has Tanjur as a quality in his writing, and specifically in the voice, and mentioned in the voice, in the voice of the women in the story. Also, I want you guys to look at the tone. Some in the book, basically, when characters are expressing themselves, at a lot of times the tone, even though they're talking about like very horrific experiences, the tone is kind of comic, right? And the other moments there's like really serious, serious tone that is attached to the experiences, and it also reflects how serious actually the element is that Voltaire is expressing and talking about. So in the old woman's story specifically, you can look at her narrative appears in chapter 11 on page 27 to 27 to 28. Basically, chapter 11. Let's all go to chapter 11. What is the old woman's story? Before we talk about the tone of some of her, that she implies in some of her experiences. There it is on page 25. You start 25. And it's kind of, her actually chapter is one of the largest chapters in the book. Right? What's her story? She was a princess, actually. Not only a rich woman, right? She was a princess. So her mom was a queen. Right? And so what? She was the daughter of Pope Urban the X, right? And her mother was a princess, actually, Palestrina. And so basically she was betrothed to marry a prince. And what happened to the prince? Does she marry him? During their engagement, actually, the prince's previous lover murders him. Right? And in despair, actually, this princess, who turns out to be later on the old woman, and her mother travel on a trip, right? And on they want to travel to basically North Africa, right? And on this trip, they get actually they go through horrific experiences where they get raped and multiple times by pirates, right? And then once they're on Earth, they're sold. Basically, the mother is murdered on the ship, right? And torn into pieces. That's what we learned. And then she survives. And she survives and gets actually sold into slavery. And she gets abused by her master. And then the master also sells her another time to another owner. And we feel like basically and in her narration, she travels through different almost countries in Africa, right? And in every country there's a stop for her, and in every country she's owned by a different master, and she's being abused sexually or physically by whoever owns her every time. And so she tells her story. And why does she tell her story? She tells her story because Pani Gandhi is kind of bragging about how she's the most unfortunate woman on the face of earth. And so she tells her story and attempts to tell Kandi Gandhi that basically her story actually could be the most unfortunate and most, sorrowful story or an experience that a woman could go through. And even she tells Kandi Gandhi by the end of her storytelling her story how she's been abused, multiple times by people, and she travels all over Africa, and then she ends up in Russia somewhere, right? And then eventually she ends up in Spain, right? What happens is that basically she says that on the ship, if she tells Kandi Gandhi, if she can find somebody who has been through experiences that are more horrible than hers, Candigande has the right to throw her basically in the Atlantic Sea. And so basically we feel that these women are kind of like bragging about like how they've gone through the most horrible experiences. But still, there is an element where you feel like after these trips, these women gain some knowledge about the world. And this old woman actually is wise. And she keeps on imparting part of that wisdom to Candigande and to Candide. But what I wanted you to look at in this specific chapter when the old woman tells her story is the paragraph where actually she ends up in Morocco, and then she wakes up after a shipwreck, right? She wakes up and she comes to consciousness when basically an Italian man is basically physically abusing her, right? And he's saying something. And the words he says basically, if you look at them, you can look at them on your own, basically reflects a comic kind of, has a comic sense and a comic tone. So she's describing the horrible experience she's going through in a comic manner. And that's part of Voltaire used sometimes actually just, using comedy to describe these disasters his characters go through. And so one time we find that in describing horrible situations, there's a very comic tone attached to it, and then others Voltaire has very serious tones when describing horrible events that happen to characters. So I want you to look at this and then look at another scene where basically Voltaire has a very serious tone to describing the misfortunes of a character. And that would be actually, if you look at basically Candide's encounter with the Dutch slave in Suriname, we'll come back to the narrative as it is and trace the trip. But you have to look at actually this episode where Candide encounters a slave and compare the tone to the tone of the woman's episode while being raped and then attaching a comic element to her narrative. And that's actually Candide's encounter with the Dutch slave in Suriname. That's chapter 19, page 51-52. What's the story also of the slave? Okay, I just told you guys the story of the old woman. What's the story of the slaves actually? So prior to Candide, I need to combo later on somebody that Candide finds, and he becomes like kind of like Candide's tour guide in South America. When they're traveling to a place called Suriname, they meet a slave, and the slave actually is just a slave laying down, in the middle almost of nowhere, who has an arm and leg missing, right? Has like the right arm, I think, and left leg missing, right? And so Candide is like shocked by this horrific scene, and he asks the slave about his life and what has become of him. And so he tells him the story, and he says that basically he was sold by his mother to an owner of a plantation, right? It was sugar plantation owner. And so his mother basically sells him and gets money out of selling her son to his plantation. And he's supposed to work in a sugar mill, work in a sugar plantation, and he operates actually the sugar mill. And while he's working, his hand gets caught up in the mill, and it gets cut, right? It gets severed off his body. And so he loses his hand, or he loses his whole arm, actually, it's not just a hand. And then he also attempts to out of despair, attempts to run away from the plantation. And what is the punishment for a slave who attempts to run away, or who wants to run away? cutting his leg. So he ends up having his leg chopped off. And so he ends up like a very misfortunate situation. And so he says that his white master kept taking him to Mass, and he learned in Mass basically that whites and blacks are all sons of Adam. And so he questions, and he raises this question of how can a person treat his relatives in this most horrific manner. So he's basically saying, how can his white owner, if both white and black people are the sons of Adam, and so they're equal, so how can a relative mistreat his relative in such a horrific way? And he also tells Candide that basically, that he lost his arm working in a sugar plantation because the sugar actually gets transported to Europe. And so the tone is very serious. And what is Wojciech trying to criticize in this episode, in this latest episode? One, yes, he does criticize the institution of slavery, not racism, slavery. And how generally white masters would justify slavery, right? And two, he's actually saying that Europe is complicit in slavery because they're benefiting from the sugar plantations. They are getting the sugar in this case, and so he's lands to be very a harsh attack on the institution of slavery and how Europe actually is complicit in this. And the tone is very serious because we have Candide, by the end of this phrase narrative, say something very important. Look at Candide's reaction. Look at page 52. Here, look at Candide's reaction. Do you guys know where his reaction is? The second paragraph, page 52. The second paragraph, exactly right after he hears the story of the slave. Look what Candide says. "Oh, Pangloss," cried Candide, "this is one abomination you could not have anticipated, and I fear it has finally done for me. I am giving up on your optimism after all." "What is optimism?" asked Cacambo. "Alas," said Candide, "it is the mania for insisting that all is well when all is by no means well." And he kept as he looked down at his Negro and was, he wept, as he looked down at his Negro and was still weeping as he entered Suriname. So, see how powerful basically this scene is, and how powerful the effect of it was on Candide. The tone is very serious, and Candide also being overwhelmed by the story. He actually says that Pangloss couldn't have predicted that somebody could suffer this great grief, or suffer as much as the slave suffered. And so, what does he say about optimism? This is a moment that could be even looked at as a turning point in Candide's way of looking at the philosophy of optimism, where he renounces it almost altogether when he says, "I am giving up on your optimism after all." And how does he describe optimism? He says the mania for insisting that all is well when all is by no means well. And yes, it's like he just realizes suddenly that optimism, even though maybe he can sometimes justify his experiences at the end as maybe the best of all possible worlds, or they end up to be fine and good, that even after every disaster in his life maybe things end up fine. For this slave, what could be the best of all possible worlds? How could his condition be the best? How could something good come out of this condition? We're talking about like a powerless man. He's like considered maybe the most wretched person on the face of earth, not having an arm nor a leg, and his experiences are just so horrible. Just abused by his family, just by being sold, and then abused by basically his owner. So and so nothing could be worse than that. How could this logically be justified? And how how could this, the life of this person, how could it eventually turn out to be the best of all possible worlds? How could his condition be the best? And so this could be considered a turning point, and this is a very serious episode. Why did I have these two episodes, contrasted against each other? Just to show you that in Candide also, there is also, Voltaire uses different tones to express his satire and express his criticism. Sometimes, even when relating very serious elements, serious experiences, he can use a comic tone, and at other times, actually, his tone is reflective of reflective of the horrific experience people go through. But keep in mind, this episode actually represents and can be maybe a turning point in Candide's philosophy and way of looking at optimism. Because almost after the scene, you feel like Candide starts questioning, not only because we know that Candide, after every ordeal, he might relate the final conclusion of each journey and each disaster he goes through to something good. He might start questioning if optimism is viable and could be, and somebody could look at optimism as maybe a consequence of his experiences. However, after this scene, you feel like Candide starts not just questioning, but kind of tries to cling on optimism, but doesn't find like a solid justification for it. Until he later on actually renounces it. He renounces it strongly linguistically here. But he continues kind of to question it, but question it in a negative manner. And then eventually he leaves this altogether in favor of another philosophy of life. Okay, let's look at, after looking at elements of tone. Okay, let's just continue kind of like looking at his journey after traveling the Atlantic and reaching Buenos Aires. What happens there? And then we'll look at the significance of his stops and how they serve different things Voltaire tries to express and talk about. Buenos Aires is the first stop in the New World. Is there any significance to the Buenos Aires episode? Did you guys read? No. Okay, so they stop in Buenos Aires. Old woman, Candigande, and Candide. What happens is that they discover Candide decides or plans to marry Candigande, right? And he can't eventually because they discover that basically some soldiers follow them from the old world, follow them from Candide, right? Because he killed the Grand Inquisitor, right? And so he has to flee Buenos Aires. The old woman and Candigande, as they arrive in Buenos Aires, they know and they realize that the governor of Buenos Aires is attracted to Candigande because of her beauty. As I told you guys, Candigande, every man who sees her is attracted. Okay? Now part of this is an extension of talking about like how women actually are more practical, more realistic, and they usually gain wisdom out of the experiences. She actually tells Candide to run away. And at that point, Candide has met basically Cacambo, who's a native, and who was a previous slave, and he kind of served a native of South America, and he kind of served Candide in a way where he's kind of like a true spy, the translator to Candide, and he accompanies him on some of his trips in South America. Anyhow, so the old woman asks Candide and Cacambo to run away, right? And she decides that her and Candigande stay. She actually advises Candigande to actually take advantage of the fact that the governor is attracted to her and stay, and in that case she would be protected and offered protection by the governor. So see, that's kind of like Candigande and the old woman's wisdom of taking advantage of Candigande's appeal, right? And so they remain. Candide and Cacambo run away. Where do they end up? There are several encounters that are important that take place. You just look at them on your own, or you've already looked at them. But you have to know that every experience kind of adds to the fact that either it solidifies Candide's assertion or belief in Pangloss's views of optimism, or either they lead Candide to raising a question about optimism. And so, by coincidence, Cacambo and Candide take a boat in a river, and they end up by coincidence in the land of gold, and that is El Dorado. And so let's look at the episode in El Dorado. What is the importance of it? What is El Dorado, actually? And how is it compared to the real world? Is it just another town that Candide, that provides a stop for Candide, or he rests, he maybe goes through misfortunes and bad experiences and then goes on? Or is this different? The land of El Dorado resembles, you said, a utopia. Okay, why does it resemble a utopia? What are the characteristics of this place? Gold is everywhere, just like any other material in the universe or in the area. So it's mostly a utopian-like place. Now we're going to talk about El Dorado a little bit and the characteristics of it and what constitutes El Dorado. However, just keep in mind, why would Voltaire have a utopian-like city appear in his book, where he's criticizing actually utopia in his writings, and he actually is a strong believer that the best of all possible worlds does not exist. So now El Dorado, is this really the best of all possible worlds that does exist eventually, or is it just a world that is the best, but is it part of the possible or the impossible world? So yeah, as you said, El Dorado is basically in the book a city that's considered a utopia. It's a city that reflects wealth. Gold exists in the city, and it's everywhere, just like other precious stones, rubies, emeralds. All these considered valuable things in the outside world in El Dorado are considered like commonplace. They're just normal. They're there, and it feels like it's just a common thing, and it's not treated in the same value. Gold and precious stones are treated in the outside world. So that's El Dorado. Now, historically, actually, El Dorado was a word that meant man of gold, right? And in the 16th century, 17th, 18th, and even maybe till the modern days, El Dorado, not modern days, actually during the 16th, 17th, and 18th century, let's say, El Dorado was considered to the European travelers and it was like a place in the mentality of the Europeans and the imagination of the Europeans that represented, yes, a place of gold, a place that if you stumble upon it in the New World, you'll just find all the gold of the world in it. And so it was created, basically, was there really historically an El Dorado? No. Actually, the Spaniards and the travelers who traveled to South America and ended up returning to Europe would come back with a lot of gold, a lot of precious stones, a lot of even loot and things they would steal actually from South America, and they would bring it back. And then so for the Europeans of that time, a lot of Europeans thought that there was one specific place that these people stumbled upon where they found all the gold and all the precious stones. And so El Dorado started to become a place in the European imagination that represents that heaven-like place that has a lot of gold and valuable things in it. That if a European stumbles upon, you just come back with with all the gold of the world almost. Okay? So, Voltaire has an El Dorado in the story. And it is utopian, almost like. How do people treat gold and precious stones and rubies and emeralds in El Dorado? It's just common. It's just like something with no value, right? Okay, let's look at El Dorado, the episode. Page 46, 47. The episode is called actually, it's chapter 18, What They Saw in the Land of El Dorado. So by coincidence, they stumble upon this place. They're in the river, and their boat just goes out of control, and suddenly they find themselves in this land, where they notice that the mud is froze, and there's a lot of precious stones everywhere. And so they end up talking to a native of El Dorado, and then the native directs them to an older man who's like 172 years old, right? And who's considered a wise man in El Dorado, so they can actually go and ask him questions and for him to answer all their inquiries about El Dorado, right? And so look at since I was talking about the value system, and I was talking about value and how like basically things that we consider maybe valuable are considered commonplace in El Dorado. Because they say that everybody's in the town not minding actually the fact that gold is everywhere, right? And life seems peaceful and harmonious actually in this place. And so they go to the old man and look at the description of his house on page 46. Yeah, the description of his house, that very first paragraph. Can you see the second sentence of the first paragraph? Candide was now playing second fiddle. Okay, here's where Cacambo and Candide goes to the older man. Whereupon he took Cacambo to meet the old man. Candide was now playing second fiddle and accompanied his valet. They entered a very modest house, for the door was merely of silver and the paneling in the apartment merely of gold, though so tastefully fashioned that the most opulent of workmanship could not have surpassed it. To be sure, the antechamber was encrusted with mere rubies and emeralds, but the skill with which everything was arranged more than justified its bare simplicity. The old man received the two strangers on a sofa upholstered with hummingbird feathers and offered them refreshments in diamond goblets, after which he satisfied their curiosity as follows. And so he answers this question. But tell me about this description. It's like a fairy tale, but is it described as a fairy tale?
No.
Yeah, it's just considered actually, it's described in a way, it's narrated in a way that knows that this is commonplace, but according to who now? Think about it. Because, how is the man's house described? Yes, it's old, the door is old, is of both gold and silver, but how is it described? Modest. Now, to enter a house where the door is a mixture of gold and silver, is that a reflection for us? Or for even Candide, and is it a reflection of modesty? Is it modest? And what about the goblets? The goblets that they were offered refreshments, and they had diamonds. They had diamonds in them. And also, what about the other description of the house? Everything is of rubies and emeralds, but this all reflects actually the simplicity of the building of the house. So how could it be modest and simple? So this is according to the narrator wants us to think that it is modest and simple because basically he's reflecting on the attitudes of the people of El Dorado towards this, all of this. And because it's commonplace, and yes, it's not looked upon in the same value that the outside, people who are not inhabitants of El Dorado would look at it. So for sure for Candide and Cacambo, this was not modest nor simplistic, right? And so that's part of why they start inquiring about the life of Algerado and try to understand what's going on. And so what also happens to them in the life of what are the questions that they ask the old man? Okay. Discuss the different elements of Algerian life that the man talks about. They ask him, okay, about God and religion. And what does the old man reply? What does he say? He asks him, do you have one God? Do you pray to God? He says, yeah, we pray to God. And the candidate asks him if it's one God. And the man says, yeah, one God, just like everybody else. And he says basically that everybody follows the same God, same religion. Here, look at it, on page 47. The middle of that paragraph, the very long, fresh paragraph on page 47. We do not pray, okay, here, when he asks him about God, he says, I might say that the people from your world ask so much very odd questions. Candide was in his questioning by proxy of this worthy old man, gentleman. He wanted to know how one prays to God in Algerado. And so what about prayer, he asked him. And so the old man says, we do not pray to him at all, said the honorable sage. We have nothing to ask for of him. He has given us everything we need. We thank him unceasingly. Candide was curious to see some priests. He had Cacambo inquire where they could be found. The good old man smiled. My friend, he said, we are all of us priests. And that counts Candide. And so what is this paragraph? What is the importance of this paragraph? What does it say? Because Candide also prior to that asked if there could be actually more than one religion. And the man said, it's the same religion as everyone else. We worship God from night till morning. And so the idea is that in the land of Algerado, everybody is fortunate. Everybody, they do have one God. They're not different actually. They follow the very same God. Everybody worships in the very same manner. And their worship is not praying and asking for things. But their relationship with God is just to thank Him because they are fortunate and they have everything. He has offered them everything, so what are they to ask for? There's nothing missing in their life. So that's one element in their life. And there's no priest actually in this world. Everybody has that direct relationship to God where they just thank Him for everything they have. And what else does the old man tell them? Okay, so there's one religion applies or that everybody worships. So there's no conflict between people over religion because it's just like one religion. Everybody's equal among equal and so they all enjoy the same favors by God, and they all worship the very same God. So there's no conflict between people over beliefs and belief systems. You understand that there's just one belief system. So whereas in the outside world there's that conflict of religion, different religions, and some religion, and in this case, what I was trying to say, the Roman Catholic Church trying to basically put itself as superior to everybody else and control people's lives. And that's actually, he mentions that there's no priest. Right? So that's a critique to the Roman Catholic Church. And now, what other elements did they ask the old man about? They asked him about the court system, the laws, the government, and what did the old man answer them? What?
You would have to be foolish.
Yeah, they would be foolish if what? If basically people punished each other, if they had a system where there's the court, system and people are being punished, he said we would be foolish. Look at that. on page 47, he says, "We would have to be foolish indeed," said the old man. Everyone, and that's answering actually people punish each other because they're different religions. He says, "Everyone here is of the same mind, and we cannot imagine what you mean by this type of mind." Each one of these answers sent Candide into raptures, and he said to himself, "This is a far cry from Massilia and my lord of the Baron's castle. Had our friend Pangloss in Algerado, he would not have kept saying that the castle of Thunder 10 Trunks was the best place on earth. Clearly one has to travel to this world." And so because there's no conflict in religion, because there's nobody being punished for difference, and because this life is all luxurious, everybody's treated the same under God, they're being gifted the same gifts, they all live a luxurious, nice, peaceful life. And so Candide comes to believe that basically this maybe is the best of all possible worlds. But then what happens to him as he stays in Algerado? Does he remain the best of all possible worlds? He lives in the hospitality or remains in the hospitality of the king for 3 months, right? Yeah? And then all of a sudden, he starts thinking about his purpose. And we learn that basically Candide's purpose after departing from Buenos Aires remains that he wants to connect and find Candide once more. So if he stays in the land of Algerado, where everybody seems the same, where everything is good, it's a pure state. However, it's not going to help him unite with Candide. He has this purpose in his life. So basically, this life becomes boring for Candide after a while. It's all the same. It's uniformly the same. Everybody lives the same life. There's no value for gold and silver because everybody has gold and silver. There's no conflict. Everybody's the same. Everybody's equal. But this life is actually not what Candide wants. He wants to go on. He's in search of, he has a purpose, and he's in search of Candide. And second, he realizes one thing. Because we learned that basically the land of Algerado, the inhabitants of Algerado are not allowed to leave, nor people are allowed to come and settle in Algerado. I mean, then they weren't. They were welcome to settle. So this is an isolated place that remains isolated. Nobody's allowed to leave. Nobody's allowed to enter. And everything in it is the same, uniform. And so Candide grows forth, and he realizes that if he manages to take some of the gold, some of the wealth out of Algerado, because in Algerado it seems like the concept of its value is different than the outside world. He says that's not valuable out in Algerado. However, if he manages to take some of its gold and precious stones and emeralds to the outside world, they will become valuable. And what would they do? Him and Cacambo could live at what? Where is that? They could live better than a lot of other people, right? I lost the page. 49. Is that where he says? Okay, yes. At 49, here, second paragraph. Look what he's saying. When he tells Cacambo that he wants to leave. "It is true, my friend, and I'll say it again. The castle where I was born cannot compare with where we are now. On the other hand, Mademoiselle Candide is not here, and doubtless you have, too, a mistress somewhere in Europe. If we remain here, we shall be just like everyone else. But if we return to the old world with only a dozen sheep loaded with Algerian pebbles, we shall be richer than all the kings put together. We shall no longer have inquisitors to fear, and we shall easily rescue Candide." So see that on page 49. So there's two reasons why he would want to leave. One, because he has a purpose to follow and to achieve, and that is finding Candide. Two, he thinks that if he also can secure some of these pebbles, gold, things that are considered commonplace in Algerado, that take them out of Algerado, they would operate in a valuable manner, and he could live better than the lives of like how many kings, he said? All the kings put together. and you could secure a very safe life. And so, he and Cacambo decide to leave. The king actually, when they tell the king that they want to leave, what does the king do? The king actually is weirded by the fact that anybody would want to leave El Dorado. But still, he actually asked his people to invent a machine that would carry them out of El Dorado, right? And he gives Cacambo gives Candide, gives Candide basically 20 sheep loaded with all the pebbles and pearls and valuable things for Candide to benefit from the outside world. And so, what is the land of El Dorado? What is the significance of creating it by Voltaire?
Would you say that all men are free?
Huh?
All men are free.
Yeah, what is that? Sorry, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, the same when the king told when he accepted them, they will leave. So he will express the idea that all men are free and free will. Right?
Yeah, he said that all men are free here, and he was actually weirded by the fact that they would want to leave to another world where others, a whole different system operates, and maybe a lot of injustices are applied and happen. And so the king is weirded that they want to leave. But then they want to leave because, one, the sense of purpose that Candide has. He wants to search for Candide. And two, because life is boring, and everything in El Dorado is valueless. However, some of this material gets transported to the outside world. Candide still wants to go to the outside world and be connected to it. Basically, there can be value to that material, and he can use it in his favor, outside world. So basically, they're aware, because this is an isolated place. The Cacambo and Candide are aware of the unreality of this world beyond, in the outside. And if it remains as it is, isolated, with no connections to the outside world, that means it's basically a world that does not exist. So this is the best of all possible worlds, but it's like the best of all impossible worlds, because it's an impossible world. It's a world that's in isolation, and exists in isolation, and beyond the interaction with the outside world. So if everything remains as it is and within the land of El Dorado, that means it's kind of an impossible world. It's a non-existent world, even though it exists. And so Candide and Cacambo, who have stumbled upon this place, realize that basically, if they stay in it, it would be yet a world that is best, but it's kind of an impossible world to the outside, to the universe, So they have to take part of its value and take it outside. And this is a whole criticism on the fact that utopia does not exist really, and as it is. And so they continue their trip and go out of El Dorado. They have this 20 sheep with them, right? And where do they now? Where's their second? Where do they end up after El Dorado? They travel and travel, right? And that's when they see the slaves. But we've already touched on that the episode with the slaves and Cacambo and Candide. So after El Dorado, he believes that a utopia kind of is the best of an impossible world because of this isolation. And then two, after the encounter with slaves, right before they enter Suriname, makes him lose his faith almost in the best of the possible world, right? Because he says that basically he kind of renounces optimism at that moment. And that's the first time after optimism emerges in the text when Cacambo asks him, what is optimism? And he says it's the mania, where you believe that everything is well, while everything is not well, right? And the mania means something that people are just going crazy about, and it's not. It's just like So it infects people. And so after that, Cacambo and Candide end in Suriname. And that's where Candide tells Cacambo that he should go purchase Candide. So he has to go back to Buenos Aires, take some of the wealth they took from El Dorado. So look,
he's getting to that world, and he's going to
actually purchased, Bannan, right? And then he says that they're planning to meet up back in the New World, back in Bannan, right? And so Columbo goes on his journey with the money, with some loaded sheep, right? And then Candide continues his trip to Suriname. In Suriname, basically, what happens? There's a very important encounter that you have to keep in mind in Suriname. In Suriname, this is the outside world. A lot of corruption is operating, a lot of disasters, a lot of corruption, and actually Candide, who has a lot of wealth with him, gets tricked by several people during his stay in Suriname and loses some of his wealth. So greed operates, as opposed to in El Dorado, there's no greed. Nobody's greedy, right? Nobody steals the mud. Gold is just like mud, and nobody just cares for that. And however, once he enters Suriname, he gets tricked several times by people who take some of his fortune and by thieves and people who just trick him. And anyhow, now his aim is to leave to Europe and to get reunited with Candide and Bannan, right? And so he decides to purchase a ticket upon a ship, right? That's traveling the Atlantic to Europe. And what happens there? Actually, the sailor of the ship takes his cargo and puts it on the aboard and tells him about the timing of the trip, right? But however, when he sells him the ticket, he keeps on tricking him. Once he knows that he has wealth, right? He keeps on doubling the price of the ticket, and he keeps on doubling it. So eventually Candide ends up paying a very unreasonable, super expensive price to the ticket, right? And now all his things are aboard on the ship. And this is a Dutch sailor who actually who's supposed to transfer Candide to Europe. But before that, he gives him a timing when the ship is going to dock, right? And what happens? Candide takes a small boat to transfer him to the ship, and what happens? As he approaches the ship takes off and leaves him behind. So he ends up alone without his sheep, and he actually has two sheep at that moment that are loaded with gold, and it just leaves without him, and so he ends up stuck in Suriname on his own without any wealth. However, he does have some emeralds and gold stuffed in his pocket, right? And so he decides to buy with the rest of the money another ticket to travel to the New World, but he doesn't want to travel on his own, and he decides that he wants to take a companion with him. And who is that companion? What is the importance actually of this? You remember kind of the context that the old woman talks about, where she actually talks about whether there are people who are go through more horrors and are having misfortunate experiences more than her. So what he does actually is that he starts interviewing people who just want to leave, and he will purchase their tickets for them. But actually, the winner would be the person who has gone through the most miserable experiences in Suriname, right? And he interviews several people, and among them is a scholar called Martin, right? And Martin actually didn't turn out to be the most misfortunate person in the city. Not really. Everybody actually has misfortunate luck, and everybody goes through horrors and bad experiences. However, basically Candide takes Martin because he proved eventually to be more intellectual than the others. Everybody is suffering on almost like the same level. But Martin is the most intellectual, so he decides that he could be a good companion, right? And who does Martin end up being? Who's Martin as a character? What is the characterization? What is the characterization of Martin? He doesn't believe in optimism. Actually, he believes the opposite. He can be mostly described as a pessimist. He believes in pessimism, if you think about it. Actually, he says that he was abused, actually, by the trade that he worked for. He was working for publishing houses. and he never made money out of that. He was abused by his wife and daughter. And also he says that basically he was sent to prison because of his beliefs. And what is his belief? Manichaean he is, right? And he says that Manichaeans are people who believe, because Candide is like, oh no, you can't, Manichaeans don't exist. And who are Manichaeans? People who believe that there's evil and good in the world, yeah. But they believe that evil supersedes good. Evil is the operating force in the universe that governs the lives of people. And Satan is most powerful in the world. He is more powerful than God. Right? That's according to Manichaeans. That basically they believe that since evil is the governing force in the world, so who's superior? Not that there's a worship of Satan, but rather Satan is controlling everything more than God, because there's a lot of suffering in the world. The world is characterized by evil, and he has no optimism whatsoever in anything. He just sees that the world is full of evil, and everything that happens in the world is according to these evil. The evil, evil being there's an unbalanced power between, relationship between good and evil. Evil is what characterizes people and characterizes everything. And so now during their trip, there's this debate between Candide and Martin on the fact, is it true that pessimism and evilness is what governs the world, or is it good? And would that restore actually Candide's faith in optimism? And so there's these 2 points, and during their trip, across the Atlantic, and prior to them reaching Europe, there's this. They observe what? There's a battle between 2 ships, right? Right before they reach, and one ship sinks the other, and so Martin, who continues to convince Candide in his theory, basically observes this incident and tells Candide, see, this is actually an example of how evil supersedes good. This is an example of how human beings actually are evil and operate upon their evilness, and this incident is just a reflection of how the best of all possible worlds does not exist. We live in the worst of all possible worlds, because people are killing each other. Evil is just superseding. And it's a characteristic, the dominant characteristic of everything, or it characterizes everything in the world. And so Candide is observing this as well. And so the ship is sinking, right? And people are perishing in thousands. And Martin is just lamenting the fact that we're living in the worst of all possible worlds. And then Candide notices that among the people who are sinking and drowning, while the ship is sinking, actually is the Dutch merchant, sailor, who tricked him and who took his last 2 sheep, right? And so when he sees that this man is drowning, Candide is like, yes, there's a cause and effect. And so basically the ship is drowning because God is punishing this man who stole my sheep and tricked me. And so he kind of tries to relate it to the fear of optimism. So there is cause and effect. There is that logic. And so Martin is like, okay, if that's the experience of one, what about the rest? Why would everybody, the thousands of other travelers or people who are on board, be punished for the mistake of one, or for the, for the mistake of one? And so Martin continues to tell Candide in this case, and Martin, that confirms Martin's belief that this is the worst of all possible worlds, because it doesn't make sense that everybody gets punished for the ills of one person. And so Candide would justify in a way where he'd say there is a cause and effect, and since actually the Dutch sailor stole my ship, actually this is divine justice. And it kind of restores a little bit of his token optimism. And so he gets 1 sheep back, actually. 1 sheep, he doesn't even drown in the Atlantic, it comes back to Candide. Candide, okay, now ends up in Europe. He goes to Venice, he gets encounters Cacambo. I just want to talk about the very last scene actually in the book, and then you guys look at the specific small details. We learned that after Candide reaches Venice, he reconnects with Cacambo. Cacambo is a slave basically, and he tells Candide that if he wants to find Condigande, he must travel to Turkey, to Constantinople, right? And there, Condigande has become a slave in a vizier's house or something like that, right? And she sees why he washes his dishes and washes clothes, and he says actually that she has become ugly and lost all her beauty. And so Candide doesn't care. He just wants to reconnect with Condigande, and he just travels to Turkey, and he finds that Condigande is not just ugly, she's far more uglier than what's his name, Cacambo describes. And what does he do? He still ends up marrying her because he's honorable. And basically on his way to Turkey, he reconnects with Pangloss. However, now when he settles in Turkey, it's Candide, Martin, Cacambo, the old woman, Condigande, and Pangloss, and later on Ticket and the monks basically join it. But Candide, according to the wise old woman, she tells him to buy a farmhouse. He ends up buying the farmhouse, right, and settling in Turkey, in a town close to Constantinople. However, what happens? They buy that farmhouse, and they just sit as philosophers, talking and philosophizing, and talking about whether. And the debate continues whether we live in the best of all possible worlds or the worst of all possible worlds. And then they resolve that they should ask a very wise man in Turkey. And they end up going to the dervish, the very wise man in Turkey, and they ask him this question. Pangloss is the most, educated and considered a spokesman. He talks on behalf of the group, and he asks the dervish, are we living in the best of all possible worlds? And he asks them why evil exists, and considered with questions of the origin of evil and what is good and what is the best of all possible worlds. And so the dervish actually tells Candide and his group and Pangloss to not question and just accept their fate as it is. He tells them basically that when the Sultan sends ships to Egypt, he's not concerned with mice in the ship. So what is that metaphor? Basically, maybe God is not concerned with his creation, maybe. Or the idea is that basically the mice in the ship just should live as it is. That's their fate. Their fate is to be mice, to just live as they are. And then when Pangloss further asks questions, the dervish tells him, shut up, and slams the door in his face. And so what they learn from him, basically, what the dervish is trying to tell them is to accept fate. Now, it's not innocent that a Turkish, Eastern person tells actually Candide to accept his fate. Because in Europe, during the time period Voltaire was writing, basically it was believed that the characteristic of the East is that they are fatalistic and they do believe in fate as the governing force in the world. So people should not question, people should not ask for change, but rather accept fate as is. And that's why it was during the time of the weakness of the Ottoman Empire, but still the idea is that if people accept, the Eastern people just accept fate as it is, and they don't think when they want to improve their lives or get rid of basically the dictators in their lives. And so now this concept of fate fate is what they should accept, and do they accept their fate? Should not ask questions, not be concerned with the world. It doesn't provide them with a viable solution in life for what to do. And while they're leaving the dervish's face, they encounter an old man, a farmer. And they ask him, they hear that somebody was strangled, a vizier was strangled in the area, and they ask what's the name of the vizier or the pasha. And then the old man told him, I don't care, I'm not concerned with what's happening in the city, and I'm not concerned with even what's happening in Constantinople. What I'm concerned with is actually my 20-acre farm that I own. He has 2 daughters and a son, and he says that he's just concerned with farming, and he gets him and his children busy with farming, and they produce and whatever produce they have, they send it to Constantinople, it gets sold, and that satisfies them. It saves them from 3 evils: boredom, vice, and necessity, which means poverty. And so Candide, that shines in his head. And so he actually thinks that that's a viable solution to actually become productive, work in the farm, and in that case, it will save them at least from the boredom that they felt as they worked outside, and they just felt so bored that there's no point in life. So Candide actually stops almost believing in optimism, but starts believing in the fact that he should become a farmer and maybe be a little bit productive instead of bored and passive, right? And so everybody engages in farming, everybody takes a role in that, except for Pangloss, who towards the end he kept on philosophizing. And even in the last scene, actually, Pangloss says that he wants to prove that this is the best of all possible worlds. He tells Candide that we went through all the ordeals to eventually end up in this farm sitting and eating pistachios. So that's an enjoyment and a luxury. So eventually this is the best of all possible worlds. Candide replies to him and tells him to just work. Right? He says, yeah, but just work. And so we must cultivate our garden. And so, what do you think about this ending? Where basically they get busy with the farm and so become productive, which is good. Think about this. But now think about it. What is their connection to the outside world? If they want to do what the farmer does, actually, so they're going to start producing and sending their produce to be sold in Constantinople. So they see that that's an element of they're being productive. But now, what about their concerns with the outside world and connections and links to the outside world? So is this a fact that they're becoming productive and so that's good and saving them from boredom? But think about the other dimension of this, that this will keep them busy and will not keep them connected to almost the other world, the outside world. They won't ask questions. Now, in this case, they won't be concerned with the question of good and evil, concerned with how life operates and works. And so it remains also a situation where they're isolated from the outside world. And so is that what Ted is trying to say, is to accept, is that one should accept fate? And where does free will operate in this case? Is it basically upon free will they accept actually to become productive people in the garden, productive in their farm? These are questions that are left open for you to think about and interpret the ending. So the ending could be maybe possibly a good ending where farming would be therapeutic for the characters and not just therapeutic and productive, or maybe it's actually that they took what the dervish told them and this is minding their own business, being busy with their own life and not worrying about the bigger questions out there. And so that's in part actually accepting their fate as it is. So think about it. And yeah, that's about it for today's lecture.